Welcome back. Business Leadership South Africa has welcomed President Cyril Ramaphosa's plans to speed up electricity reforms. During the State of the Nation address last week, the President made a whole range of promises that load shedding will end soon. The President's pinning his hopes on private investment to do away with load shedding. Let's reflect on the President's State of the Nation address. And of course, this is all the more newsworthy given the fact that we have been plunged to stage 6 load shedding just over the weekend. We're currently, I believe, on stage 5 load shedding. Business Leadership South Africa CEO Busi Mavuso, it's great to have you with us on the program. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. The President was expected going into the State of the Nation address, or it was very needed for him to shoot the lights out, right? Not literally, even though we did go into load shedding just hours after the President's SONA, but he did need to say something quite exceptional about this roadmap for the year ahead for our country.
It did, Michelle. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me. So absolutely, and I think when you listen to what the speech did or what the President did, it was largely a backward-looking speech and very little looking forward. No new funding commitments were made and virtually nothing new policy-wise. So it's an interesting one because I think he fell into a trap, Michelle, of using the platform to campaign for his political party, using the theme of the democracy child, which was rather disappointing. It was also quite interesting how the state capture was blamed for the economic collapse and the collapse of certain institutions and the decimation of the economy, as if it was not a mess of their creation. And then it goes on to praise the ANC for fixing what they broke. And unfortunately, blaming the previous administration for state capture doesn't cut it, because the truth is that there are still too many people in its current administration who were responsible for state capture. So it is not just the previous administration issue, because 5 years into this administration, more could have been done to hold those people responsible to account. But I think once he got into it, Michelle, you was right and appropriate for him to celebrate the progress made in electricity reforms, because these have enabled the private sector to invest, and much more investment will come with further reforms, including the 14,000 kilometers of new transmission lines to accommodate renewable energy that will be built over the coming years. He promised to fast-track that process, and it will be very crucial, Michelle, that it does that, as this will enable great investment by the private sector. If you remember, Michelle, a lot of businesses, when they were announcing their annual results presentations in 2023, and I can assure you that 2024 is going to be the same, a lot of them were highlighting how difficult the trading environment is, in South Africa at the moment. They were citing the issues of load shedding, they were citing the issues of the transport and logistics, dysfunction, they were citing the issues of crime and corruption, they were citing the issues of water infrastructure. So it's going to be important that we therefore put all our time, energy and effort and whatever interventions are required to make sure that these can be done. Because if businesses are not confident in continuing to invest and operating in South Africa, then it means that the 5 trillion rand target that the President had put at the last year investment conference of trying to get investment into the country is not going to be achieved. Because then you have to ask yourself a question of what exactly is the business case of investing in South Africa. And what stands out for me, or what stood out for me as the President was talking, was how the VW CEO of passenger cars last year in November, Michelle, I don't know if you remember, Thomas Kafer, talking about, how as VW, they are going to have to at some point ask themselves a question of why do they continue to operate and actually build their cars here in a market that is very far from the real market, but more importantly, in a market that is actually plagued by so many of these issues. And it was referring to transport logistics issues, and it was referring to load shedding issues. So I think the President really, as much as he touched on the energy and the logistics roadmap and so forth, he didn't go far enough, And I think the one thing, Michelle, is that the President knows very well that the progress has been minimal because of the resistance from some in his own government who are currently frustrating the process. Business wanted clear indications of how those blockages will be overcome to improve confidence that reform momentum will be maintained, and that unfortunately wasn't clear from his speech.
Yeah, and the issue of corruption, Busi, is an issue that really hangs over us as a country, right? It's not a separate issue to our challenges in housing, to our challenges in health, in education, in energy, in transport logistics. It's very much the central issue to many of the challenges we face, right? And what President Cyril Ramaphosa had to say during his address at the State of the Nation address versus his comments that the ANC is accused number one insofar as state capture is concerned was again the president shooting himself in the foot, right? The Corruption Perceptions Index tells us exactly that. South Africa going to its lowest level ever, going below the global average. So when we talk about trying to attract that much needed investment for us to go past the IMF's forecast of 1% of growth for South Africa, which is what we need to create jobs, to get our young people off the street corners, out of the house, doing something, getting an education. You know, it's very much the key issue insofar as many of our challenges are concerned.
It definitely is the key issue. I think you'd remember there's this report that was actually released. I think it was released in 2022. It was also released in 2023, and it is a report that was actually done by GTOC. GTOC is an acronym for Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. You know, Dr. Mark Shaw presented the report, and this report was showing that South Africa is witnessing a dramatic expansion and legitimization of organized crime, which is rapidly rising, with dire implications for the economy and the country's stability. You know, it says organized crime is a threat to stability and the country's democratic institutions. So that's where we are. I mean, the report talks about the fact that South Africa is sitting as number 19 in the world's criminality index. It says that according to the Numeo 2021 crime index, you know, we are rated as the third most dangerous country in the world. And the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime puts us amongst the top five countries with the highest female homicide rates. So it is a problem. You know, we've got this culture of lawlessness. But you see, Michelle, it becomes a problem because then you see, South African citizens are not going to do what you say, they are going to do what you do. So as long as government is not taking a decisive, no-nonsense approach, you know, towards those that are implicated with malfeasance in their own ranks, it becomes difficult to say, how do we then expect the South African citizens to actually do the same? It can't be right, Michelle, that you sit with people governing the government officials who see nothing wrong with stealing food parcels from the sick and hungry
during a pandemic
and dying, you know, and they are still walking around with impunity.
Yeah.
And you think that you will arrest crime and you will actually be able to deal with that. You can't.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings us to our breaking news story on the side of your screens there, Busi. The Constitutional Court ordering the ANC now to hand over the records of its cadre deployment committee meetings to the DA. That's meant to happen within 5 days. And, of course, this is the Constitutional Court. There's nowhere else to go. One wonders what those minutes will tell us.
Absolutely. And I think that is definitely, it's worthy to be news breaking or groundbreaking, because that is important. You remember the president himself has always acknowledged, to a point, he speaks about the ANC not just at the State of the Nation address, but at the Zondo Commission. Instead, the ANC is actually the number one accused in as far as state capture is concerned. You know, we have even gone as far as establishing a committee led by Professor Somadoda Figeni to lead the professionalization of the public service. But you, therefore, you know, need to ask yourself a question as to how serious is government about this professionalization, you know, story of the public service, because the reality is that government and the public service needs to move from appointing people with loyalty to people with capability. The decimation that you're seeing in our environment, Michelle, the reason why we are failing at the basics, you know, the reason why ordinary South African citizens, you know, cannot experience the right level of service that they get from receiving ordinary services, you know, it is precisely because we don't have a professional, you know, public service, you know, and it is precisely because of this issue of cadre deployment. There is nothing wrong with cadre deployment, by the way, as a concept. But it should therefore mean that you put people who know what they are doing. You put people who've got the key skills, the leadership, the capability, the capacity to can be able to do their jobs. But it is clear that this government has not been doing that. We have way too many gaps in government that are actually spanning from capacity, from capability, from leadership, and from key skills. And that is why the decimation of a whole lot of these institutions continue. That is why businesses actually had to come in to work with government to solve for some of these issues, because then we bring that which government is failing to provide, which is the capacity, which is the resources, which is the intelligence, which is the capability, and I think we if we are not careful as a country, we are going to move. Actually, I think we are there. We are naive to think that South Africa is a democracy. South Africa is not a democracy. It is a aristocracy. A aristocracy, Michelle, is a state governed by the West, or its least suitable and the least competent of its citizens. So by continuing with cadre deployment in a manner that this government is doing, not allowing the country to put their best foot forward, in terms of putting the right people into positions, they are really turning this democracy into a aristocracy.
Because when you appoint people not on the basis of skill, Busi, and you appoint people on the basis of loyalty, it means that these people are in key positions and they are beholden, and in this case beholden to one particular party.
And that is precisely what the problem is. I mean, when you look at what's happening at the city of Joburg at the moment, that is precisely the dysfunction that you're seeing there. In the city of Joburg, I think it's just but one example where you ascend people into power who are not going to make decisions that are in the best interest of the country, because that is what leadership demands. When you ascend to that office, you're no longer beholden to the ANC or to the EFF or whatever political party you are. You actually are beholden to the followers and to the people who have actually put you in that position. And what therefore should guide your decision making is what is in the best interest of the organization, what is in the best interest of the country, what is in the best interest of the citizens. But because we are doing cadre deployment wrong and we are not putting the right people into these positions, then we are sitting in a mess that we're sitting in, Michelle.
We all sit for performance appraisals in the jobs where we're in, or most of us do, I imagine, where you have to answer. You have a set of things that you must have delivered on for you to have fulfilled your employment contract, Busi. The President has promised that as well for our ministers. Where is it?
That was 5 or 7. I don't even know how long ago that was. And if I'm not mistaken, I think sometime last year, there was another political party which was actually asking and demanding that the President puts in the public domain, the to your point, the performance appraisal of a whole lot of these ministers. And I don't remember the President ever sharing that. That tells you, it actually speaks volumes, to say that they either don't exist, or to the extent that they exist, they are not actually what they should be. They are not even a 3, if you take the 1 to 5 scale that we actually normally use. And if you continue to keep people into positions who are not fit for purpose, then, you end up with problems, not in only one facet of the economy, but in a whole lot of facets. So things are going to have to change. And I really hope that, this ruling, by the court will hopefully push the President, push the government into doing the right thing. And for the first time, probably maybe putting South Africans first.